Newt, what's your reaction, and what should be America's reaction to these developments?
Well, first of all, I think everyone's reaction has to be that this is a tragedy for the families that are directly involved, the families that were hijacked on those airplanes, the flight attendants, the pilots, the people who have died today in the World Trade Center, and the people who have died today in the Pentagon. I think all of us have to reach out in our hearts to them. But beyond that, as a nation, this is a 21st century Pearl Harbor. This is a 21st century kind of war. I think we need to refer to it as an act of war. This was not a random event by a random terrorist. This was a systematic, complex operation of military proportions undertaken cleverly by people who have state support and who only survive because they have the support of some states that protect them. And I hope that the American government, the president, and the American people will react to this as an act of war. This will be more casualties, I believe, than Pearl Harbor. It is at least as horrifying as Pearl Harbor, and it deserves a complete and total American response to ensure that it never happens again.
When you mention the number of casualties, Newt, I'm reminded that roughly 55,000 American servicemen died in Vietnam. There could have been almost that many people in the World Trade Center buildings today. Not that all of them necessarily would be casualties, but clearly we are preparing for a catastrophic loss of life.
This is a terrible event, but it will become even more terrible if it isn't the basis of a deliberate, systematic, and total American response. This reminds us that we're all vulnerable. As you heard, people in Chicago are leaving. They're evacuating major buildings. People in Boston are leaving. Here in Washington, I walked past the mall. People are leaving. I talked with policemen at the Capitol who have sealed off our national capital. We need to recognize we can only be a free society if we are prepared to relentlessly pursue and eliminate those who would engage in this kind of war against civilians and against a peaceful society.
Newt, if you'd be good enough to stay with us, I want to bring into the conversation Bill Daley. He is a former FBI agent who worked on the World Trade Center security precautions after what we thought was a terrible event back in 1993, an event that left 6 dead and 1,000 people injured. Bill, could you ever prepare for something like this?
This is one of those scenarios, John, that is in the worst case, planning. Is that it's those things that close to an act of God, is that it's almost impossible to plan and protect against when you have a major free city with airliner routes that are right nearby the World Trade Center. To ever think that you'd be able to protect it from that type of an assault. We rely in these cases on our intelligence gathering network, our international domestic terrorist task forces and intelligence gathering mechanisms to help us. Apparently, this has let us down in this particular case, but it's not to say that we're not on the rebound, that we will not investigate and find the people who are responsible for this. And it's also not to say that this will happen and be repeated across the country. I think we need to have a state of calm and people understand that the government will secure these locations, we will investigate, and we will protect the rest of the country as best we can. But these are type of events, John, that next to nuclear disasters are in the worst case scenario planning and almost get down to the point of so catastrophic that it's difficult to develop exact plans for it. I'm sure we'll hear today stories of heroism, we'll hear stories of tragedy, we'll hear stories of people rising beyond what they were ever called to do, because these type of plans, particularly even in New York, as much as we're New Yorkers that take on a lot, this goes far beyond anything we've been challenged with to this date.
Newt Gingrich, you mentioned that there has to be a coordinated response by the United States. Obviously, it's too early to know who is responsible, but let's say that that it turns out that Osama bin Laden is somehow behind this. So what does America do? What kind of pressure can we bring to bear on the Taliban government that is harboring him that we haven't brought to bear already?
Well, let me just say that we don't know yet who's done this, and I don't think we should rush to judgment. But it is fair to say that bin Laden has claimed credit for having sponsored and financed and structured earlier attacks on the embassies in Africa, for example. It is clear that 3 weeks ago, bin Laden said he would strike the United States in the United States. And the only point I'd make today in the middle of a tragedy, I think we first have to take a deep breath and recognize how big this tragedy is for the American people. That I don't think we have to become paranoid. I don't think we have to go into a bunker mentality. But for 8 years, we have said publicly that bin Laden is a major threat to the United States. And yet for 8 years, while we have launched Tomahawk missiles and we've done other things, we haven't taken him as seriously as he has taken us. And all I'm suggesting is that if we don't have a decisive response to convince observers that you cannot kill innocent Americans in peacetime without retaliation of severe proportions, that other groups and other people will decide that the most open society in the world is also the most vulnerable, and they'll exploit those vulnerabilities. I think this is as decisive a moment for our future as Pearl Harbor was, in a different way. As I said earlier, this is a 21st century opponent, not an obvious nation state, but in the Sudan, in Afghanistan, in a number of other places, we know where bin Laden's assets are, and we need to take the risk of going after them.
Newt Gingrich.